Good evening, good evening, good evening. It's your girl BG with the T, and I'm here for the Tea Time with Monica Takeover. Now, my girl Monica needed to take some time off, but she wanted to make sure you, her listeners, still had good quality content to come back to, and therefore she called your girl BG in because this week's tea is going to be bomb. But before we go ahead and get into this topic tonight, I want to go ahead and do it in true Monica fashion and start our episode off with a quote. Today's quote, I'm not sure who the original author is, but the quote is, "Broken crayons can still color." And I'll repeat that. Broken crayons can still color. My interpretation of the poem is that no matter how broken you become, you can always be put back together again to create a masterpiece. And when I think about the quote, I think about a crayon in its true form. Sometimes we are coloring hard, sometimes we're scribbling in the paper, and sometimes that crayon breaks in half, especially depending on the grip that we have on it, right? And some of us may still color with half of the crayon, and others may throw that crayon away. But when we think about a crayon, right, it is wax. And in heat, wax can be molded back together again. And so no matter how many pieces this crayon breaks into, once you apply some heat, some pressure, right, you can mold that crayon back together again to continue to use it, to create the masterpiece that you were creating, to continue to color through your page. And the way that interprets into life is that no matter how broken you are, no matter how many pieces you may crumble into, you can always be put back together again. Sometimes life's pressure, the grip of life can get to us, and sometimes it feels like we're breaking in half. And while some people may throw us away, we have to remember to keep ourselves together, right? To know that we can still color, that we can still push through, and that with heat, with pressure, right, it creates diamonds, right? So even through the heat of life, we are still able to push through, we are able to go through, and we are able to continue on to whatever it is our purpose was. So broken crayons can still color speaks to the fact that, yeah, sometimes we may not be our best selves. Sometimes we may not be whole. But just because we're not whole does not mean that we can't continue to complete our mission in life, our purpose here, and what it is that we were set to do here. So that is this evening's quote. And in speaking to our life's purpose and, going through and feeling like you're broken, right? I want to talk about resiliency. And the reason why I want to talk about resiliency is because I feel like so many of us have tapped into resiliency without even knowing, without even realizing that that's what we're doing. As a whole, we think about this global pandemic that we are in and how it shifted so many different things for so many of us, right? And not only did we have to deal with what was happening in the world around us, but we also had to deal with what was happening in our own personal worlds, and knowing that the show doesn't stop, right? While things were happening in the outside world, things inside of our own personal life was still brewing around. Some of us were dealing with our own internal natural disasters. And when we talk about resiliency, resiliency means to be able to overcome, to bounce back, to adjust, and to adapt to change. When something happens and we're able to readjust who we are, the space that we're in, to adapt to that change. And so many of us have been tapping into this resilience piece. And I wanted to share a little bit with you all personally because 2020 was a rough year for me. Before 2020 started, I experienced a situation with my mom that really rocked me to my core. And it changed and altered our relationship and the access that I now have to her. And the situation really, some days I don't even know if I'm coming or going. And, this happened before 2020 started. And so going into 2020, I was still feeling hopeful because I felt like I still had, pieces of my family around. And although I was grieving the loss of this relationship with my mother in a certain way, and not because she, passed on, but we grieve the loss of anything when something is lost, right? We grieve when we have a severance of a relationship with people who are still existing on this earth, right? We grieve those things because the relationship no longer looks the same. And so the situation that happened with my mom shifted our relationship to where our access to each other was no longer what it used to be. I can't pick up the phone and call her. I can't just go down and visit her when I want to. All those things have been restricted. And so going into 2020, my mind was already warped. And then we're hit with this pandemic, and life as we have known it is different. And as 2020 continued to go on, I lost my grandmother at the beginning, and I felt lost. I felt broken. I feel like some days I just don't know what I'm doing. And to lose someone, especially as my grandmother was to me, really took me to a place that I feel like I hadn't been in a very long time. I had lost my job in 2020, like many of us, right? I had to do this big move in 2020, and it just felt like I was alone. Felt like I had nothing. I felt like I had nobody. And we know realistically that when we go through things and things happen, that we're not really alone, right? That there are other people in our space. At least for me, I knew that there were other people in my space who had my back, but I just couldn't see it. I couldn't feel it. It felt foreign to me. And so 2020 was rough. It was hard. It was difficult. And now that we're in 2021, it still feels like I'm trying to process that, because with the virus happening and with the world being shut down the way that it was, some of us didn't really get to grieve our loved ones. Some of us didn't have services to go away, especially at the beginning of the pandemic. And again, still processing my mother's situation, processing the loss of my grandmother, processing this job. It was so many changes happening. And the one thing that stuck out to me was resiliency. With everything taking place around me, I had to adapt. I had to adjust. I had to reshape. I had to refocus who I was in that space and get acclimated with this new world around me. And it was not easy. Oh my God, it wasn't easy. And who says resiliency is easy, right? Because some days we don't even know how we're going to get to the next day. But I guess that's all rooted in resiliency, being able to still keep it moving sometimes, even when you can't see the light at the end of the tunnel. And I think it's important for us to talk about resiliency, because in being resilient, I also think so many of us put so much pressure on ourselves to be our best selves, right? To present ourselves in a certain way, to show up in life a certain way. Because if we don't show up in life a certain way, we're afraid that people are going to look at us differently, that people are going to judge us, or people are going to have something to say. But the reality is that within resiliency, you have to think about authenticity, right? Because in resiliency, you have to be authentically you, right? And not only do you have to be authentically you, you have to have a sense of vulnerability. And we all know that vulnerability is very hard, because for whatever reason, the norm of society is that when you're vulnerable, you're looked at as a punk, or you're looked at as emotional. And I'm just here to say that screw that. I'm no longer following life's norms, right? The norms that life, whoever established that, put together, because some days I am not going to show up as my best self. Some days I'm not going to put a smile on my face and pretend to be this customer service person that I'm not. Like, hi, yes, this is Miss Garrett. Thank you so much. When it's BS, when it's BS and I'm not feeling good, right? When you sometimes don't even know if you want to brush your teeth or wash your bottom when you get up, because you feel like life is pressing you down into the ground and you just don't know which way to go. And that's all a part of resiliency. That's all a part of getting through and going through, right? Being able to really like get over the hump, walk through the hump, walk around the hump, however it is, but you gotta defeat this hump. And so in resiliency comes a space where it doesn't always look pretty. It's not always, oh my God, yes, I made it through, I pushed through. That's not what resiliency always looks about. Just like how when they talk about healing is, oh my God, it's self-care and I'm doing my nails. Sometimes it's ugly, okay? Part of being resilient, sometimes it's ugly, it's painful, it hurts. And some days are just not good days. But that's the beauty of it all, right? The beauty of it all is that we as humans are able to adjust ourselves. And many of us choose to look at life through a very possible lens, because we can either choose to look through the problematic lens or the possibilities. And I think with the spirit of resiliency, many of us are able to look at life's possibilities. Although there are problems that present itself, should we continue to look at it through a problematic lens, or will we change our lens and shift it to the possibilities, to shift it to the resiliency that we all have and that we all live and dwell within our being? Resiliency is not something that some of us just wake up with and have. Sometimes we have to dig deep, right? We find ourselves in really dark spaces, dark places, and under rocks and hidden in trees, literally and figuratively for many of us. And in those spaces, right, in those darkened, sometimes quiet spaces, we are able to adjust to what the new normal is. And a lot of us experience that with the pandemic. And although we're not fully cleared from the pandemic right now, even though many of us think that we are and that the rules don't apply, the reality is that the world is still in the middle of a pandemic where people are losing so many of their things. And one of the biggest things many of us are losing is our mind, right? And we just have to really think, and we have to really be honest with ourselves in this space that many of us have been able to push through. Many of us have been able to continue chug, choo, choo, being the little engine that could in this life. And some of us don't take the time to notice that we're being resilient. Some of us don't take the time to give ourselves a pat on the back. Heck, sometimes we don't even give ourselves the grace. And in resiliency, it requires a grace. The same grace that many of us would give to other people, we have to give that same grace to ourselves, right? And so with resiliency, and I know I keep saying with resiliency, because I want to keep driving back to the point that resiliency is within each and every one of us. Anytime a situation has happened and it is not what it used to be, if there was a change, whether it be a good change or a bad change, that's resiliency. Being able to adapt to those things, being able to power through those things, and being able to stand firm and say, you know what? I did that. I got over that. But also within the resiliency, being accountable, right? Being accountable for our thoughts, our ideas, our actions, and being intentional with all of those things. It's very important aspect in resiliency. And I just wanted to share these thoughts with you all, because the bottom line is that we have to show ourselves some grace, that we have to really love on ourselves and appreciate our being, appreciate who we are internally, appreciate who we are physically, because the reality is that changes happen so often, and we got to be able to adapt to that change. because we all see what happens when people don't adapt to change. You know, they find themselves stuck in this way and stuck with no movement because they refuse to accept the change. But the one thing in life that's constant is change. It's like life and death is continuous cycle, right? It's a circle of life that continuously happens. That's all a part of change. Here today, gone tomorrow. And sometimes it gets really frustrating. I can't tell you how many times that I just felt like I wanted to give up. I mean, even right now, I'm taking over Monica's podcast, but I took a break from my own influencing space, from creating content and showing up, right? Because I felt like I was pretending, that I wasn't being the Brittany that so many people knew me to be. But then I think about it, those are the different aspects of me. Those are the different dynamics of me. That is a part of my resilient journey, that some days it's Brittany and then some days it's sad Brittany. You know, some days I got the smile on my face and I'm pepped up, I'm alive, awake, alert, enthusiastic. And some days I'm like, leave me alone. The heck? I don't want to be bothered. And I think that's perfectly okay in this journey of life. And in life, we will encounter resiliency each and every time. You know, we will discover different things each and every time within resiliency. We will always rediscover ourselves. We will always notice different changes, and we have to learn to adapt to those things. And in the spirit of speaking of resiliency and talking about this strength, right? We can even relate resiliency to the things that's happening around us today, especially as a Black woman. I'm proud to be a Black woman, a beautiful Black woman. I know we don't like to say strong, but a strong, resilient, astonishing, outstanding, excellent, amazing, sometimes broken Black woman. We look around us and we see what happens to us each and every day, whether it be at the hands of the police or other people who are supposed to be our peers. Think about the resiliency of being a Black person here in America, and the changes that we've had to go through, and the changes that we've endured as a people. And, you know, as a Black woman, we've overcome, as a Black people, we've overcome so many things. And that is the spirit of resiliency. What we're going through right now, what we're seeing right now, like so many of us are being resilient and pushing through. And I just want us to remember to give ourselves some grace in this resiliency. And with the topic and the talking about it, people are always telling us to be strong, but never really give any tips. So as I, get ready to close us up on this particular topic, I really want us to talk about what are ways we can build upon resiliency and really owning that. And I think one of the first steps of resiliency is being open to change, right? We have to be able to be open to change because, again, it goes back to me saying that the one thing in life that is constant is change. Things are always changing around us. Things were, that something that's happening right now may not be something that's happened before. Everything continuously changes, and we have to adapt to that change, and we have to be open-minded to some of those changes, because either you're gonna adapt to the change or you're gonna get left behind. And who wants to get left behind? We have to be about that forward movement, that progression. And so being open to change is a part of, building upon your resiliency. Self-care. Self-care is my tip number 2 on how to really build upon resiliency, because we have to take care of ourselves. We have to love on ourselves. We have to cherish ourselves. We have to truly pour into ourselves and pour into who we are, because without pouring into ourselves, we're really nothing. We have nothing, and we can't really be there for other people if we cannot nurture and care for ourselves. So that means taking the time out to do something for yourself and something positive for yourself, even if it just means taking a nap, cutting your phone off and turning off social media, right? If it means going to get your nails done, get your hair done, do your makeup, even if you're not even going nowhere, maybe going out to get a drink, going out to eat, to the movies, whatever it is that makes you feel good, something that's positive, because some of us, we dabble in some things that may not be too good for us. But it's all about caring for ourselves, because we can't care for other people if we can't care for ourselves. Another great tip about building upon resiliency is finding your purpose, knowing your purpose. What are you passionate about? What brings you joy? I don't say happiness because I feel like happiness is just a temporary emotion that we experience, just like sadness, anger, and disappointment, right? But joy is something that's internal, right? It lives within us. It is something that we know despite the things going on, this can still create a smile for you. It's almost like a peace, a stillness, right? Joy is like a peace and a stillness. So what are you passionate about? What is your purpose? Because we all have purpose here. Even if we don't feel like we have purpose, we all have a purpose here. We were all put on this earth to do something, to be something, to accomplish something. Be it something big, something small, but an accomplishment is an accomplishment. And so what is your purpose? You can build that off in resiliency. Being optimistic, right? Being optimistic helps you with being able to adapt to change, because I go back to the problem versus possibility. Now, we can choose to look at life through a problematic lens. Everything's a problem. This is an issue. That's an issue. This is on my nerves. Or we can choose to look at the possibilities from the problems, right? If something doesn't go wrong, something doesn't go right, how do we fix it? How do we make it work for what we need to make it work with, right? Yeah, we're going to encounter a bunch of problems in life, but what type of possibilities can we pull from those problems? Changing the perspective, changing how we look at the world, changing how we really focus on certain things can really help with building our resiliency. And just being able to find focus, staying in your own lane, right? Worrying about what it is that you've got going on. What is your business, right? It goes back into your purpose, because sometimes we find ourselves competing with other people in different lanes when we got our own lane, right? Where we're here for our own reason. And that's how we push through and fight through resiliency, because we stay in our own lanes. And we focus on what the prize is, what the goal is for our own personal selves. Because staying in our own lanes is important. That's an important part of a lot of things in life, right? My next tip is believing in your capabilities, right? You have to believe in yourself. You have to believe that you can do something. And while we look for the validation from other people, remember that validation is for parking and not for people, and that we have to validate who we are and then validate our own experiences. Because if we don't validate us, we'll be looking and seeking validation from everywhere else. And sometimes people don't give you the round of applause that you want, right? But in understanding and building on resiliency, it means that you have to believe in yourself. You have to believe in the things that you can do, the things that you can accomplish, and the goals that you have set forth for yourself. And lastly, my last tip for resiliency goes into having a strong social network. I know that at the beginning of this conversation, I talked to you about the things that I was going through. And if it had not been for my strong social network, the people around me, my tribe, my village, my people, my folks, the family that I built myself, not the family that I was born into, but the family that I was able to build myself, I don't know if I would have made it. I don't know if I would have been able to really push through as hard as I pushed through. I don't believe in self-made, because nothing about me is self-made, because I've always had somebody and something to get me through these obstacles. So I'm going to go back over for these tips of resiliency. I talk about self-care, right? Taking care of ourselves, putting ourselves first. I talked about being open to change. It's important to be open to change, because change is constant. It's the circle of life, and change is always going to be happening, but we gonna get caught up if we don't adapt to change. Being optimistic. Are we gonna view life from a problematic perspective, or we're gonna view life from, the possibilities? Not only changing the perspective, but building your strong social network. Who is in your corner? Who's got your back? Right? Who can you depend on? Believing in your capabilities, believing in ourselves, believing in who we are and what we can do. And lastly, it's finding your sense of purpose. What are you passionate about? Who are you? What are you trying to accomplish here while we're in this realm of life? Resiliency is in all of us. Each and every one of us, when we go through daily struggles, we are resilient. Resiliency does not have to look like this big thing, right? If you're able to get up out of bed and change your focus about something that may have happened early in the day, that's being resilient. Something so small, being able to accomplish and overcome something so small and being able to adapt to it is resiliency. And so there's another quote, and it says, we may have to fight a battle more than once just to win it. We may have to fight a battle more than once just to win it. And I had to repeat it myself because I really think about who I am, the space that I've been in, my story and where I've come from, and the history of my young 30 years of life, and thinking about, wow, sometimes we don't win on the first try. Sometimes not the second try. Sometimes we got to keep getting back up over and over again. And in getting back up, sometimes we change how we try to tackle certain tasks, because there's not one way to accomplish or get to the end goal, but you have to fight a battle more than once sometimes just to win it. And it means that you may fall down, but you're able to get back up, and that the battle is not over, that you have to continuously fight it, and that you will be able to get over that, and that you truly are resilient. And so in closing this segment up, I want us to repeat an affirmation, and I want us to say that I am, right? When I say I am, it means that I am affirming this. I am owning this in this space. And so as I close up, I am resilient. I want you all to repeat after me. I am resilient. And I'm saying I am resilient because I am affirming that I am resilient. I am affirming that I am strong. I am affirming that I can get through all things. I can get around this. I know that on the outside of this, I'm going to be okay, and you're going to be okay too. I want to thank you for rocking out with BG with the Tea as I do my Tea Time with Monica takeover. I appreciate you for being here, and I hope you tune in next time and keep rocking with my girl, Monica. Thank you for the opportunity. Love you much.